go. So if you would like to tell people who you are and where people can find you.
Sure, my name's James Esses. I'm a trainee psychotherapist, former trainee psychotherapist, I should say. I'm sure we can talk about that in a moment. I've been campaigning, speaking out about gender ideology and the impact it's having on children. I'm co-founder of a group called Thoughtful Therapists. You can look at our website online, thoughtfultherapist.org, and you can find me on Twitter at James Esses.
So I'm certainly not an expert in this subject at all. I've got limited experience, except for kind of things that I feel I can transfer my experience with, possibly what a confused teenager might be experiencing. So I feel there's some things that I can kind of relate to, but tell us about it. Tell us what your experience has been and where this campaign of yours started.
Well, look, it's interesting that you're kind of drawing a distinction between the ways in which you can and can't relate to this, because I've been saying all along that this is an issue that affects every single one of us, because the impact of gender ideology is on the welfare of our children, it's on women's safety and rights, it's on fairness in sport, it's on free speech, it's on science and objective truths. I mean, all of us have some dealing with those topics in one way or another. So I don't think anyone is not affected by this. But it's a topic that's very scary for a lot of people, partly because they don't feel that they've read up on it enough, and partly because they're terrified of offending someone by speaking the truth and by being labelled a bigot or a transphobe. But for me, it always comes down to the children. You know, I was training as a therapist. I'd been a counsellor at Childline for a number of years. I wanted to spend the rest of my life helping children, and once I discovered what was happening to children with gender dysphoria, the irreversible medicalisation that many of them were going through, and the regrets and the mental and physical damage that they were left with, I was absolutely horrified.
But they're told it's temporary. They're told it's almost a pause if it's the puberty blockers which are taken. So the information that they've been given is so misleading. And I think what you said about not wanting to cause offence. So one of my areas of interest is communication. How can we improve? And I think all of these kind of attacks on language is just a way to stop people having conversations. So then rather than learning and rather than exploring that subject, and rather than, you know, just being able to say something that might be a bit silly, but just being able to have those conversations and trying to work it out and trying to process this information. And I just feel that it is just shutting down by calling people names that you don't want to be labelled with, associated with. It's just shutting down the conversation.
And nobody is free from this. You know, I've come across a number of celebrities on social media, Twitter, who have been fervent LGBT, transgender supporters, advocates, and all the rest of it. I saw one the other day who accidentally misgendered someone on Twitter, and she went under huge attack by all of her supporters, all of the people that she'd been championing all along, because she made a mistake. And I think she's beginning to realise, I hope she's beginning to realise actually, that nobody is safe from this cancel culture, where if you say something with no malice intended whatsoever that is a mistake, these people will come for you, they'll come for your reputation, sometimes they'll even come for your livelihood.
There's just no forgiveness online. There's no forgiveness with the woke mob. And I saw something the other day that was saying, like, you could never be woke enough, because they're just moving the steps. Yes. They're moving the boundaries, they're blurring the boundaries constantly.
Well, look, this is more than just making mistakes. This is being told that we must think or believe things that we know to be inherently untrue. Human beings are very, very good at deciphering the sex of another person. Studies have shown that very, very young children are good at deciphering the sex of another person. And we're being told basically to challenge and distrust our natural feeling or response towards another person, and simply to go along with whatever they tell us that they say that they are. And I come across people on social media, etc., who now identify not just as the other sex, but as inanimate objects, for example. And we're being told to kind of go along and believe this. So these are the times that we're living in.
What do you think is the way that we can kind of go against that? And would you say it was parents that we need to speak to first, or children that we're kind of trying to...
Well, I'm particularly concerned about the education system. I come across materials being taught to very young school children. I have parents reaching out to me with their own concerns. I believe that children are basically being brainwashed from a very young age. And, those are their formative years. It's very difficult then to try and influence in a positive way, thereafter. So I am quite worried about the next generation. I think much of it's got to come from the top down, particularly from our politicians. I still remember it was seen as such a momentous occasion amongst the individuals that I associate with when Boris Johnson finally came out many months ago and said there is a difference between men and women. And, I know people who work with Boris, and I was told that it had taken him a lot of courage and a lot of time to be able to even come out and say something like that. I mean, that's a real tale of the times that we're living in, when that is seen as some sort of momentous statement by a prime minister. I mean, the fact that he even felt that he had to say that is concerning in and of itself. But so much of it, as you've alluded to, is based around language. It's so crucial. And, our language has completely shifted subtly without us even noticing. I mean, if we think about pronouns now, and the fact that it's become completely the norm for people to be wearing pronoun badges and to have their Zoom handle or their email signature signed off with pronouns. For people who do not have gender dysphoria, for people for whom there is no doubt whatsoever as to what sex they are and what they identify as, but it's this virtue signalling. And it sends a message again to very young children that this is normal, that every single person has their own unique gender identity, which very well may not correspond with their birth sex. And it's this narrative that we're teaching children. So I'm as concerned about the kind of softer language issues as I am about the medicalisation, because I think these things go hand in hand.
What's your thoughts on TikTok? Do you spend a lot of time on TikTok or see the videos of the pronouns?
I don't have TikTok myself for my own mental sanity, but I do follow that Libs of TikTok group on Twitter, which is obviously terrifying. I mean, I think that tells me everything I need to know about it. But yes, this is the way that children, young people are having their conversations. In some ways, I said that we need to start with education, we need to start with our politicians, but even if that changes, children already have these kind of communities behind closed doors in which they're being affirmed, sometimes even groomed. I don't think that's too strong a term to use in this respect, and there's not a huge amount that anyone can do about it, really.
Because the parents could have the TikTok app and they could be getting recipes, exercise videos, interior design videos, and kind of be thinking, oh, this is harmless. But then their child, like you say, in their bedroom behind closed doors, can have the same app, and it can be really, really sinister. And when you have a look at some of the hashtags, they have billions of views, and it's almost like I see it in my head as cake. And the parents have got their slice of cake, which is the content that they're fed, and then the children have got another slice of cake, and they're constantly fed this information. And there's a lot about identity, gender dysphoria, a lot of people with Tourette's and DID, so dissociative identity disorder. And then that becomes the norm. So then they start, changing the way they dress or their hair, and then they start adding the pronouns, and then they start speaking differently. And it's almost like they're just encouraging this echo chamber of do more, and it's never going to be enough. And then, in my opinion, because the children still don't feel whole, or they still don't feel like they're quite as good as this TikTok user who's got 3 million views, that's when the surgery starts to come in, or the medication starts to come in. And it's quite scary that I don't know what it's like in the UK, maybe you do, but in America, where there's parents that are saying, the teachers aren't telling us.
From my therapeutic background, I've learned that part of being human, the human condition is dis-ease, and everyone's looking for a silver bullet to make all of that disease go away. And on this topic, this is what children are being told and promised. Because we know that adolescence is a difficult time. Puberty is a very difficult time. People's bodies are changing. They don't sometimes recognize themselves. They're literally changing, physically and mentally. It can be very scary, I know, particularly for young girls as well, the way in which their bodies are changing. And I'm sure if you asked many girls, even in time immemorial, who were struggling with their puberty, they'd probably say, yeah, in the moment, I'd probably rather not go through with this. And now we're offering a pill that can do that for you. That can take away all of that disease. But it's not a silver bullet, because this dysphoria is not, unfortunately, it has been treated as the end goal, the end point. But actually, my view and the view of many others is that it's simply a symptom of much wider disease that a young person has in themselves. When I used to speak with and counsel young people, I'd get them to kind of imagine a few years forward now, you've had the puberty blockers, the cross-sex hormones, are you happy? And they would often reflect on it and say, well, no, actually, I still wouldn't be fully happy because there's X, Y, Z I still don't like about myself. And even doing that basic reflection back to them got them to realise that this is about them and how they feel about themselves in the world. This isn't as simple as just taking some puberty blockers and then everything's going to be fine. But this is the message, the cruel message that we're sending to these children. And by the time they realise that it's not the silver bullet they thought that it was, it's far too late.
Oh, and the surgery, like the bits that I've seen, and I'd say I don't claim to be an expert, but the bits that I've seen is just, it's awful. It's awful, the procedures, and then the impacts afterwards, where people can't urinate, they're getting repeated infections, their sexual urges are not able to satisfy them because they're still getting erections whilst they've transitioned to a female. And it just seems like torment, which they have now, one, got to live with that change, and also that decision, and the adults that were there to protect them didn't. And that feeling of being let down, and then the hate that people seem to get, like as they call them, like detransitioners, the people who have changed their mind, the hate that they get online, and this community that they thought they were coming into, who is all about love and equality and support, just drops them.
I mean, I've come across some very worrying statements from prominent trans activists who have suggested that having your breasts removed is the equivalent of just having your appendix removed. And in response to those people who say, but, this is irreversible surgery, a double mastectomy, you can never get those breasts back again, the response, quite relaxed and casually, was, you can always just have breast implants, So this is the wavelength that these people are on. But I mean, it's absolutely abhorrent that these type of statements are floating out about there. And I've researched various private clinics that offer these type of treatments, and they use dangerously euphemistic language about it. They're not called double mastectomies; they're called gender confirmation procedures.
It's all minimising it, isn't it? It's all minimising the impact that this is going to have, and like top and bottom surgery, it. When you actually look into it, it's just like, yeah, don't look over there. We'll just turn that volume down here, and about the short-term surgery, and then we'll just increase the volume about what's going to happen afterwards. Get all this acceptance, and you'll be happy, and everything will be solved. And I mentioned before about kind of changing my body, and so a member of my family was constantly on about my teeth. Your teeth, your teeth, your teeth. You have to brush your teeth. And I was obsessed with brushing my teeth. Like, I remember in primary school, a friend got like a nail file kit, like a battery powered one. And I remember obviously seeing the dentist and that they had tools and filing my teeth. So my enamel is quite damaged now, my teeth, because I was seeking validation. I wonder, if more time was spent with these children, kind of peeling back everything that's going on. And you made the good point about affirming. And you were saying about, we wouldn't do that with someone with an eating disorder. So did you say that with your colleagues? What was the response that you got?
I say that quite a bit. And usually the response is actually pretty positive in the sense that there isn't much that can be said against it. You know, I try not to engage in hyperbole, and I try and engage in evidence and logic-based arguments. And, you know, I always come back to the fact that gender dysphoria is a mental health condition. And if we make the comparison between the way in which that is treated compared to other mental health conditions, we're treating gender dysphoria with medication and surgery that changes somebody's body. And with other things like anorexia or body dysmorphia or body integrity identity disorder, we are dealing with that through counselling and therapy. You know, these are completely at odds with one another. You know, why is this? It's because it's an ideology that's swept the country. I mean, the particularly cruel narrative we're giving to children is that the way to be yourself, the way to be your true self, is by fundamentally changing yourself. I mean, it's such a fundamentally inconsistent statement, and yes, it's kind of become the norm. And I and others are being told by these trans activists that if we do not simply affirm young people into taking these irreversible medication or surgery, that we're not allowing them to be their true selves. And what I'm saying is their true self is exactly how they were made and exactly who they are sat in front of me. And therapeutically speaking, we should be looking to help change people's minds and not their bodies if they're feeling discomfort. But it's not really a surprise that children have been caught up in this, because we're being told that we should celebrate young people who do that. Well, you know, some of these young people never have unfortunately been celebrated for anything else in their lives. I come across these workbooks again. I mean, there's one in particular which always stands out for me. It's a picture in a primary school workbook, and it's got all the flags associated with the different genders and sexualities. You know, it's got the pride flag, it's got the demisexual, asexual flag, loads of them, all multicoloured and bright in boxes. And then there's 2 boxes for heterosexual and cisgender, and it's just the white page.
Boring.
Yeah, I mean, what child is going to look at that and think, God, you know, I really want to be that? So this stuff is very subtle, but again, it's when you take it all together, you know, a young person is coming into this who might be feeling a sense of disease in themselves, and they're thinking, well, I could feel better about myself, I'll be celebrated for it, I'll be like everyone else in my classes now. Sounds pretty appealing.
Mm-hmm. I think back to when I was doing my mental health training. So I went to Edinburgh to do my conversion course, and I was on a child and adolescence mental health ward. And the majority of people there had eating disorders. I was very surprised at the amount of boys that were there, how young these children were. And they'd be like doing star jumps when they went to the toilet, or they'd be like just moving the food around the plate, or they'd be looking on, like on the internet at, what do you call it, pro-anorexia websites and things like that, and getting all these tips and trying to share these tips and things. And I just couldn't imagine the nurses and care staff saying, oh yeah, you know, let's not eat that apple today, and you know, you'll lose a few pounds, and maybe do some more star jumps, and you know, have you thought about a gastric bypass, or you know, lipo or something like that. It blows my mind that people can't see those parallels that are just forcing this. And the cynic in me says there's a price on that child's head, because they're going to be earning big pharma, if you will, money for when they start to come into have medication, puberty blockers, and they're going to be customers, lifelong customers. So that's what the cynic in me says. What are your thoughts about that? I
agree. There's a lot of money to be made in this. I mean, a lot of the focus has been on the NHS, you know, and the Tavistock closing down, and I'm very happy about that.
What's the Tavistock?
The Tavistock was basically the gender identity clinic, the NHS clinic that was being offered for young people who are struggling with gender dysphoria. It was the only clinic that was operating. There were concerns over many, many years. There were various whistleblowers who had come forward basically saying that they were pursuing an affirmation-only approach, that they weren't recording data and long-term stats on the young people there. And now Dr. Hilary Cass, who'd arranged to do a review on behalf of the government on gender identity services for children, has ordered that it's to be closed, basically, because it was failing. And she said that, you know, it's putting people at risk, putting young people's safety at risk. So there'll be a new model set up, a new regional model, etc. But it's good news that clinic is closing, but as I say, there's many private clinics and online clinics operating up. There's one in particular called Gender GP. One of its founders has been struck off the medical register for putting children in danger, and co-founder, who's that individual's wife, has been suspended from medical practice for similar reasons. And yet this clinic is still allowed to practice. And I've spoken to parents who were signposted towards Gender GP, and their children were given puberty blockers at the very first consultation. So, and that's just one example of many. So if anybody from the government happens to be listening to this, we need to do something about this, because this goes much further than just the NHS. There's also to say there's an element of kind of contagion present here. I mean, you spoke about some other mental health conditions. You spoke about the way in which we would treat eating disorders or anorexia. We know that young people can struggle with social contagion around certain mental health conditions, particularly young girls, and we've seen that in the past with things like cutting, like eating disorders. More recently, we're seeing it with Tourette's, actually. Tourette's was always, historically, a male-dominated mental health condition, and now the ratio is completely inversed again, and there's a huge swathe of young girls presenting with Tourette's-like symptoms. And we've seen the same thing with gender dysphoria. Again, historically, this was something, the vast majority of which was young boys struggling with, and now the majority of children, young people presenting to clinics in the UK are girls. So we have to question, why has this happened? And the argument is that it's another form of social contagion, unfortunately.
So what's next for you? Where are you going? What direction are you taking?
Well, my life's in a bit of limbo at the moment, because I was expelled from my master's degree in psychotherapy after I started a petition to the government, basically asking them to safeguard therapy for children struggling with their gender. And I'm now suing my university provider and my therapeutic regulatory body. I'm taking a case to the Employment Tribunal. I'm having to crowdfund the money, and I've.
Oh yeah, sorry. Where can people find you on the crowdfund? We will put the link as well. But where can people find you?
The website's called Crowd Justice, but if you just type in James Esses into Google, it should be the first hit.
And you seem to get a lot of support.
I couldn't believe it, actually. I mean, I've raised, I think, today, I think it's about £105,000. Lots of small donations from thousands of members of the public.
People want to help you. People want to get this resolved.
Well, I practiced as a lawyer myself previously, and I always said I wanted to avoid the legal system as a litigant myself, but I've been left with no option here. It's very long and arduous. I commenced the case about a year ago, and we're still in the preliminary stages. No trial dates have actually been set yet. I've got a hearing in October, and I'm hoping that trial dates will be set there, but it probably won't be until end of 2023, actually. And I'm going to have to raise even more money, unfortunately. I'll be going out with the begging bowl again. And, I'm very, very appreciative of what people give, because, well, firstly, they don't know me. They don't owe me anything. And secondly, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis after a 2-year bloody pandemic. But from the messages I get from people, I think they view this as a way of expressing their own views on a topic, and I believe that in some ways I'm a mouthpiece for those who don't have a voice in this debate. And so, whilst I'm bringing this case to seek personal justice, I want my reputation back. I'm doing it as much on behalf of other people. I want to send a message to society. I want to send a message to educational institutions that they cannot clamp down on people's free speech on this issue simply for believing in biological sex.
Yeah, and it's that compelled speech, isn't it? Like, you will say this, you will think this is the correct way of thinking. I've got a good friend who, she is just going through the kind of employment tribunal process now. She works for a charity, and they were completely discriminating against her. And for me, words and actions have to match. And everything that this particular charity said on their website was all nice, it was all shiny. But then how they were treating her, it just didn't match at all. And like yourself, she's not necessarily wanting to go through this process, but she doesn't want other people to experience this. And she wants kind of like possibly policies to be reviewed, or for people to reflect and think, gosh, we really haven't been meeting our own mission statement or whatever. And I think people see these big brands, and I'll just say the NHS, and I think everyone thinks that it's all perfect and they're all really nice people who work there, and actually they're just people. And some people, you know, they won't listen to a different perspective. They won't allow debate. And I think, what was your master's in?
Psychotherapy.
And the irony of you doing a master's to improve your communication, listening skills, supporting, and then not receiving that from your lecturers.
Oh, it's. I still can't quite believe it happened as it did. University educational institutions are there to encourage debates and stimulating argument and different ways of thinking. And psychotherapy particularly, it's based around empathy, active listening, because we're dealing with complicated and sensitive issues. And what happened, I raised concerns, I spoke out about some issues, and then I was expelled over an email. Bizarre.
Did they announce that on their social medias?
They did, yes. Yes. The same evening they announced that a student had been expelled on their Twitter account. But given what had been occurring weeks previously, it was very obvious that this was me. And then there were various trans activists online celebrating and thanking them for having gotten rid of me. It's been over a year since this happened, but I still can't quite believe that they did it in that way. Without a single conversation. Very, very bizarre. So I've been left with no choice but to take them to court, and I will have my day in court, and I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and I guess what I found really frustrating is all of the income and the funding that is with like the media and pharma and all these like they're heavily funded machines, and then. But they are doing bad things. They are pushing messages to people and influencing people in ways that aren't helpful to them long term. And I feel that, what my message was informed voluntary consent, and what your message is like, and then you've got to fund it yourself. And it's another obstacle of trying to beat this well-oiled, well-funded machine. And it's not easy, but it is rewarding because your conscience is clear and you've done everything in your power to try and make a difference and try and give people a voice.
Yeah, and I try and tell myself that, and some days are easier than others. And I think this has shown me the best and the worst of people. I mean, I've met some incredible people through this. I've had support of people with extreme generosity that I will forever be grateful for. But at the same time, I guess, as many do, unfortunately, a hell of a lot of abuse online from those who disagree with my position. And some of the things that they say, it's particularly hurtful because the reason I spoke out in the first place was a care and a concern for young people and their well-being and their safety. So, as I say, some days are better than others, but, this issue is more important than just me and my own personal feelings, and I just have to, take some of this on the chin, really, because the stakes are far too high for these young people. So I'm not going to stop speaking out about this, even though many, I'm sure, would like me to do so.
Yeah, and I think when people find you, though, however they find you, I think from the messages that I was receiving, it was just such relief. Like, somebody else is thinking like me, somebody else is speaking out on this subject. And I don't think you'll ever be able to measure just how many people you have helped. You'll get the people that the messages you're able to read and the emails and things of people saying thank you and the donations. But there's going to be a lot of people who never engage in your content but watch it and are relieved that you're speaking out and you're helping in this subject.
Well, if that's the case, then it makes it all worthwhile.
How have your family been? Have they been supportive? Have some of them not been too happy?
No, my family and friends have been supportive. I can't pretend that many of them take a great interest in it or necessarily know much about the topic, but they've been supportive of me standing up, for what I believe in. My girlfriend in particular has been extremely supportive. And she was there with me on the day that I got expelled, and I would have been in a very bad state had she not been there. So I'd have struggled through the last year without her presence. But I've been very fortunate in that respect to have that support around me, because I know many others that don't. But I'm in the same boat as many. Other people have been cancelled. There's other people like Maya Forstater, Alison Bailey. These have become kind of household names who've had to take cases for similar reasons to me. Kind of effectively being cancelled for speaking out about sex and gender. And there'll be others, unfortunately, who will be cancelled until there comes a time in which a greater proportion of the British public are willing to stand up and say no more. We're not going to allow this to continue on. But as things stand, people are still a bit too scared. And I've had other trainee therapists reach out to me, say to me that they're too scared to speak out because they're worried the same thing will happen to them. I know of some people who've put their entire course on hold pending the outcome of my case. So I hope that the more legal victories we have, it's going to give people the safety to know that they can speak out and that they're not going to get cancelled for it.
Have you ever done anything like this before?
To be honest, when this all occurred, I just was trying to keep my head down and get my degree. I was in the process of setting up a private practice. I decided I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing this new vocation that I was spending 5 years training towards and tens of thousands of pounds. So I just wanted to get the degree in my hand. But as I said earlier, once I started speaking to children struggling with gender dysphoria, once I started reading the research papers and speaking to parents and detransitioners, I thought this is far too important for me to stay silent. Once you've had your eyes open to this and once you've seen some of what's going on, you can never unsee it again. I want to have as much conversation and debate as possible on this topic, even with those people who seek to shut me down, even with those people who, throw slurs and vitriol at me. And I've offered invitations to a variety of prominent trans activists on social media to have a debate with me. And every time they go silent. As far as I'm concerned, sunlight is the best disinfectant. As far as I'm concerned, the more that I have conversations with people with a different view, the greater likelihood that one of us is correct, and the more we can learn from one another as well. So I'm going to keep offering these conversations out, and I don't believe in stooping to these personal attacks and vitriol, partly because I don't need to rely on it, because the evidence and the logic, I believe, is on the side in which I'm speaking out in favour of. And I feel that when people resort to those petty slurs and vitriol and personal attacks, it's a sign to me that they've got nothing else.
Yeah, and people are very good at attacking you as a person, but not your message.
Correct. I'm longing for the day that I get some decent rebuttals and refutations to the points I'm putting out. But that day hasn't come yet, and I don't suspect it ever will, in fact, because this is a pretty, on many levels, pretty clear-cut issue. And much of life is subjective, but much of life is also objective, and there are certain objective truths in the world, and sex and biology are some of those.
There was a lady that I was talking to a couple of weeks ago, and she was telling me that men and women are the same. And that's what I think is diluting now. Like, men and women just are not the same. They're just not. There's so many things that me and my husband do completely differently because we think different. Almost just a dilution of everyone's the same. Like, there's no individuality anymore, because with the people that I'm seeing with like the trans community, they're all following the same pattern of wanting to be individuals, but then they're conforming to a stereotype of what that looks like. And there's no individuality in that because they're all conforming to that same thing.
That's a good point. I mean, look, it's something very ironic about the fact that we're being told that, people should be free to be whatever they want to be, and at the same time people are then being told that they must apply fixed labels to themselves. I find that very bizarre. Human beings think that they like unlimited choices, they want unlimited freedom. Actually, in reality, they don't. There's something really quite disconcerting about that. And there's an old kind of mythological tale. It's called Buridan's ass, but it's basically this donkey and there's two bales of hay of equal size, kind of equidistant from him, and he can't make his mind up which one he wants to go for. And he keeps chopping and changing his mind, and basically he ends up dying of starvation because he doesn't actually reach either one of them. And I think this message to children, and this again applies outside of just gender ideology, but this message to children that you literally can be absolutely anything in the world that you want to be. It doesn't matter what anyone else says. All that matters is how you feel and your lived experience, is a very cruel message, because that isn't the way of the world, actually. There are boundaries. There are limitations as well. We should champion children as much as we can and give positive reinforcement. But the message of you can be whatever you want to be, irrespective of what anyone else thinks, and even if it is biologically, scientifically untrue, is a very cruel message indeed.
And I see the gender neutral. So their child is going to grow up gender neutral. And I feel that you have to belong somewhere. And, to start with, let's say you're a boy, you're a girl. But if you don't belong in either of those groups, let's say, because your parents have decided that you're going to be gender neutral, how can you decide which one's where you fit when you don't know that you don't fit there because your parents have never given you that exposure? So we're not going to say you're a boy or a girl, gender neutral, and then you can decide later. But you've not had that opportunity to grow and develop within that sex to then decide that that isn't the right one for you. I think that's very confusing, especially when our very basic need is to belong. And now they're saying you don't belong in either.
I mean, we've basically regressed back to old stereotypes, and we're also medicalising completely normal, natural behaviour. Again, I come across teaching materials which suggest to young boys that if they like the colour pink, they might be girls trapped in the wrong body. I mean, that's how aggressive this stuff is. But in reality, there is nothing wrong with being gender atypical, if we use that term. We talk about spectrums a lot, and sex is not a spectrum, but masculinity and femininity as we know them is a bit of a spectrum. People think of these really macho masculine men on one end and these really feminine women on the other end, and we're all a blend of different traits and characteristics, and there are more feminine men and there are more masculine girls, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and people should be able to dress and express themselves how they want, and that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them, and it doesn't mean that they're trapped in the wrong body, and it doesn't mean that they need medication or surgery. That's the kind of key message I want to get out there, actually. People should be free to be how they want to be. Their sex is their sex.
And you said about stereotypes and pink. And yeah, that's a really valid point. So it's all just a social construct. Like, you can be whatever you want. However, if you like pink and you're a boy, then the stereotype suits our argument. So we're now going to say you're in the wrong body because that stereotype suits us, but all the other stereotypes not so much. One of the answers that I see a lot is, it's so complicated. It's so complicated you just wouldn't understand. But if you're in charge of providing care for children, you're going to have to explain it in a way that children understand. So why can't you explain it in a way that I understand?
The truth is that it's an ideology of inconsistencies, actually. We're told on the one hand, all that matters is how you feel about yourself. But on the other hand, you need to make, to feel truly real, you must have, medication or surgery to turn you into who you really are. Or you shouldn't be pathologizing being trans. You shouldn't be medicalizing being trans. But on the other hand, you must also make irreversible medication and surgery available to us. Or you must refer to us as how we identify, but it's okay for us to call you cisgender even if you don't agree with it. It's an ideology of inconsistencies, and that will be its ultimate undoing, actually. And that's why people can't explain it to you in a simplistic way, because it's fundamentally inconsistent. I think people just need to do their own research, really. As I said earlier, once you're presented with the facts, the images, the studies, I think it becomes pretty clear what's happening in our society. So it's not my job to preach to people. People can do their own independent research of this. And I've spoken out about women's safety and rights, and I've spoken out about the impact it's having on sporting competitions as well. These are all of huge importance, but for me, the most important topic of all will always be children's well-being.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.